So this public works proposition requires cities to secure land for public space in their expansion areas before development happens. This is very important. Once the land has been occupied by development, it's almost impossible to go back and impose a grid on it. And the costs of servicing unplanned areas are significantly higher than in planned areas. In this slum in Rio, as you can see, the cost of providing basic services is 6 to 9 times higher than in a well-planned area. And this holds true around the world, meaning that the highest costs for services are being imposed on the people who are least able to bear them. In contrast, the Comas district of Lima, Peru, this is also an informal settlement. This was settled through planned invasion in the 1960s. So when this neighborhood was settled, it was a slum. Professional squatters came in advance of selling the plots, surveyed the land, and laid out a network of 16-meter wide roads, standardized 200-meter plots, and also reserved land for parks and schools. As a result, over time, this area was able to become normalized. And from the air, you would never know that this used to be a slum. This is an example of a house in this neighborhood that sold for $38,000 in 2012. On the matter of parks, we also have two contrasting examples. We have Sao Paulo, shown here, which has the lowest amount of green space per person of any major city, and we have Toronto, which has among the highest. The difference between the two? Toronto laid out its network of public open spaces before development happened, meaning that the land could be obtained and secured at a reasonable cost, and the public health and environmental benefits are significant. So, these are the 4 propositions, and by the way, I know that you're all very polite people, probably far too polite to interrupt me if you have a question, but if you do have any questions about this, note them down and we'll deal with them. We can talk about them later, over lunch, or at the end. I think this is a lot of information and it's very important to ask questions if you have them. So moving on, we're actually implementing these ideas, right? So the nice thing about where I work is when we have these good ideas, we actually go on the ground and we implement them. So we're implementing them with pilot projects in Indonesia, Myanmar, China, Ecuador, Mexico, and India, and we're on the ground right now in Colombia, Ethiopia, and in parts of China. So I'm the coordinator of the project in Ethiopia, where we're working with 16 cities throughout the country. So what are we doing there? Well, we're starting with demographic information, population information, and we're using it to project 2 things. We want to project the growth in population, and we want to figure out the change in population density over time. So the reason why that matters is because our global research shows us that population densities worldwide are falling at an average of about 2% a year. Now what this means in practical terms is as cities grow, they will take up more land than they did in the past for the same number of people. So because we take the density information and the change in density, we're able to make more realistic maps about how much cities will be growing. 2 great examples of places that have successfully done this in the past. This is the Cerdà and Sanche plan for Barcelona that expanded the area of the city 9-fold, and of course this Mumbai metropolitan plan. So our objective is to visit cities and help them make these plans. Step 2 is to encourage cities to increase the administrative areas that they control, so that when the city grows, the city administration will have control of the areas where growth is happening. Often, government becomes fragmented because municipalities have too small boundaries. China is a leader in this, obviously. This is the administrative area of Beijing, shown here, which is 11 times larger than its built-up area, which is in red. Step 3 here is encouraging cities to plan their arterial roads in advance of development. And this is huge, as I mentioned, for reasons of public transportation and also because it makes it much cheaper to provide trunk infrastructure. And it's not enough just to plan these grids. We want to actually help cities secure the land, whether through property liens, through outright purchasing, to ensure that these rights-of-ways remain secure when development happens. Step 4 is creating a system of public open spaces. So this improves quality of life, but it also has an important environmental effect. So your arterial road grid and your network of public open spaces can be thought of as directing or guiding growth away from environmentally sensitive areas like wetlands and steep hillsides. It's not enough just to tell people not to settle on a wetland or a hillside. You have to give them an equally attractive alternative option. You have to give them somewhere to go. So with this information in hand, the city officials I'm sorry, I got off my PowerPoint. So this is Valledupar, Colombia. And in Valledupar, Colombia, the first thing that we did is we made this map, which is a map showing growth in the city in 1989, 2001, and 2011. And we constructed this map using satellite imagery, Landsat satellite imagery, combining it with census data for those years. And what this told us is that the population density in the city of Valledupar is falling by about 1.5% per year. That allowed us to construct this map, showing the likely extent of the city by 2040 under different density estimates. And this is obviously just an estimate. When we make these maps and show them to cities, this is an estimate, but it gives them a sense of the scale that they need to be planning for. How many hectares of land the city will need to make available in order to remain in control of their expansion process. So, with this information, city officials created this map, directing the expansion to the south of the city, away from an environmentally sensitive watershed and agricultural areas. And in this area, they laid out a 1 kilometer by 1 kilometer grid plan. And they're currently purchasing the rights-of-ways from around 200 landowners using funding from a Latin American development bank called Corporación Andino Fundamental. So here's a video that we created about this urban expansion initiative in Valledupar, Colombia.
Hoy tenemos una inmensa responsabilidad quienes gobernamos ciudades intermedias en crecimiento, que han crecido notoriamente en los últimos años. Y dejar un plan de crecimiento y de expansión significa garantizar la calidad de vida hacia los próximos años.
Estamos en Colombia trabajando en 5 ciudades que tienen un común denominador. Son ciudades intermedias que tienen un rápido crecimiento poblacional. Al programa de urbanización de la Universidad de Nueva York le interesa trabajar con ese tipo de ciudades que están expandiéndose muy rápidamente y están creciendo en términos poblacionales muy rápidamente también. Valledupar es una ciudad de rápido crecimiento.
Hemos identificado que hace 20 años la ciudad tenía 1.600 hectáreas, hoy tiene cerca de 2.800 y de continuarse este patrón tendrá aproximadamente 8.000 hectáreas. Valledupar está creciendo a 3.34% al año. Esto quiere decir que si esta tendencia continúa, su población se duplicará en los próximos 20 años.
El crecimiento rápido de las ciudades puede traer muchos problemas al futuro y puede hacer que las ciudades pierdan competitividad, se vuelvan inequitativas, económica y funcionalmente se vuelvan deficientes.
Valledupar presentó un crecimiento desbordado, donde llegaron casi 90.000 habitantes en los últimos 10 años, víctimas del conflicto y de la violencia, y la ciudad se ha expandido, se creció de una manera desordenada y superó la barrera del ordenamiento territorial de la ciudad, donde no había servicios públicos. Esta es la tierra contemplada en el proyecto de expansión urbana de Valledupar hacia los próximos 30 años. Debemos actuar hoy porque es más barato y además nos asegura el buen uso y la racionalización de los recursos públicos. Las intervenciones hacia el futuro serán muy costosas, por eso es importante desde hoy asumirlas con los costos reales que verdaderamente le garantice la inclusión y equidad social a las próximas generaciones. Con el proyecto de urbanización en los próximos 2 años estamos dejando acciones concretas para que Valledupar encuentre una expansión ordenada e incluyente.
En este momento estamos asesorando al alcalde en 3 cosas. Primero, haciendo un plan de expansión de tal manera que se asegurarán los derechos de vía y las zonas a donde se construirá una malla de vías arteriales y donde se reservarán los espacios públicos de la ciudad a futuro. Segundo, marcando la tierra que se va a necesitar para esa expansión. Y la tercera es conseguir diferentes herramientas de financiación para que estos planes de acción sean implementables y una realidad en el futuro.
Nuestra propuesta apunta a que todos los vecindarios del área de expansión tengan suficientes y adecuados servicios de infraestructura, servicios de transporte, espacios abiertos y puedan desarrollarse en mejores condiciones para que la calidad de vida de la población sea adecuada.
Si la población pobre puede acceder a una buena calidad de vida a través de un buen servicio de agua potable, de energía, de gas y además acceso fácil a la educación, vamos a tener mejores niveles de seguridad y vamos a tener un desarrollo equitativo e igualitario para toda la población.
Ahora estamos colaborando en la definición del área de expansión que se va a requerir y del trazado que tendrán las vías arteriales dentro de esa área de expansión para garantizar que esas vías se construyan en el futuro.
Esta es una zona que la estamos desarrollando con vías, tenía un mal servicio de agua potable y ya también se le logró mejorar hacia los próximos 30 años. ¿Cómo están? Tanto gusto saludarlos. Sí, ya viene. Estamos iniciándola prácticamente de la periferia hacia el centro de Valledupar para que sea incluyente y realmente beneficie a la población más pobre.
Lo que el proyecto de urbanización pretende es dar cumplimiento al sueño del alcalde de hacer de Valledupar una ciudad sostenible y socialmente equitativa. Nuestro papel es el de asesores del municipio, pero al final la ciudad la que tiene que decidir su futuro.
El proyecto de urbanización define la estrategia con el conocimiento y la experiencia que hay en el mundo para poder consolidar una propuesta exitosa para Valledupar en su expansión hacia los próximos 30 años. El proyecto de urbanización nos va a generar justicia social, inclusión y desarrollo social y económico. Nosotros queremos que el proyecto de expansión urbana de Valledupar sea un ejemplo para todas las latitudes del mundo.
So, that's urban expansion. And you might be wondering, if we're here to inaugurate an urban expansion observatory, which is a research project, why am I talking to you about the efforts that we engage in on the ground? So there's a strong connection, in fact, an unbreakable connection between this work that we do on the ground and the work that we're doing here at MES. The only way that we can confidently approach mayors and city officials and tell them that this is the right plan of action is through the research that we're doing here, which tells us we can identify areas that are well planned, areas that are poorly planned, and we can make the connection between this and social equity, which kind of brings me to the next leg of our New York University urbanization program, which is the Monitoring Global Expansion project. So monitoring global urban expansion, this is a 4-phase program of research intended to support the argument that planning for urban expansion produces better outcomes in cities and better outcomes for individuals. So it also aims to create a methodology for studying cities all over the world, which is something that hasn't been done before. So in many ways, cities are like people, right? When you're healthy, you like to think of yourself as unique, unlike any other person. But when you have a disease or an illness, the last thing you want to be is unique, right? You would hate to be, you want to go to the doctor when you're sick and you tell the doctor what's wrong and the doctor says, oh yeah, I know what that is. Cities are the same way. Of course, all cities are unique. But sometimes cities get sick. And when cities are sick, we want to figure out what their sicknesses have in common. And this starts with asking a basic but actually quite difficult question. What are all the cities on Earth? What are their names? Where are they located? How many people live in them? To answer this basic question, we first had to decide, what is a city, right? And we settled on a couple of metrics. We have a population cutoff. So for our purposes, we only count a city as a city if it has a population of at least 100,000 people, and a density cutoff. It has to have an average density of at least 1,000 people per square kilometer. So I'll be totally honest. There is room for debate about this, but in general, it seems to hold true. And when you take those criteria, 100,000 people, 1,000 people per square kilometer, you get this map of all the cities in the world, of which there were about 4,000 in the year 2010. So now we know where all the cities are, we know their names, and we know their populations.